What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 61 of the Around the Crease podcast. This week, Michael Ward and I, we're kind of talking about the sportsmanship topic again, kind of like we did earlier, but this week it was prompted by the 52 goal scoring game that Colorado Mesa did earlier this year. So we kind of talk about a little bit about that game, but also kind of how it relates to high school lacrosse. And of course, like we usually try to do, we try to fix it and see what solution might work. Also this week, I do a little bit of mourning, and Michael talks a little bit about his challenges with no more LaxPower, because this really is the first year we've been without LaxPower, and now that we're kind of most of the way through the season for some states and kind of just starting for others and midway through others, I wanted to kind of see how it's affecting him in his first year, and definitely talk about how it's affecting me, and we'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on it as well. So let's get into the show. All right, we're back with another episode of Around the Crease, and this week we're going to talk a little bit about, I guess, the hot topic of the week, but then we're also going to talk about, I guess you'd call it the hot topic of the season, with the scoring, database or lack thereof so far. But obviously we're just a few days removed from the Colorado Mesa slaughter of Johnson and Wales, and that's kind of been the one of the topics of conversation on Twitter. And for me, it's always one of those, we talked about it a little bit earlier this season, I forget what number podcast it was, but kind of talk about the most goals scored in a game, because that is a stat that I keep and have for many years, and it's one I always get a little bit of crap for just keeping in general, because I understand it's a high school site, but I do it for the historical purposes, because someone will eventually ask, what's the most goals scored in a game? Because someone always will tend to ask. But, Michael, let's kind of kick it off. I mean, I don't think we really need to recap too much. For anybody that's listening to this, you probably know Colorado Mesa defeated Johnson and Wales 52-0. And I guess a meeting of a D2, D3. Yeah, I had to make sure it wasn't football to be 100% sure to begin with, but I'm gonna get your. It's probably not a hot take at this point because we've had some time to think about it. But what's your take on that, just in general?
Well, the hot takes have been ridiculous. If you're going to go with that, I mean, outrageous. As we were talking about, when someone's talking about firing the coach for winning too big, that's pretty hot in a hot take. Yeah. But at what point do you say we're not scoring anymore? I mean, I just don't. I don't get it. I don't get maybe 30. I don't know. So
yeah, I mean, it's almost like what you almost have to agree on, like what is too much. I mean, and that's very subjective. Like that is completely subjective. Right. And I've heard. I mean, I think I've seen all the range of responses. I mean, you got the shot clock, and I think it was Barstool Jordy. And generally, to be honest, like I don't usually read the Barstool stuff, but I read the article, and it was like they average about a shot every 69 seconds. Shot clock's 80 seconds. So it wasn't not too obscene, but I did see people who thought like they should just throw it out of bounds and basically intentionally turn the ball over to give it to the other team. I saw the range of responses, and I'm not 100% sure where I fall on this. Like, to be honest, like, I guess I'm not overly offended by it. Like, I guess I don't have a overly, like, I saw the score, and I was like, that's a lot. And then I just honestly kind of moved on. Like, I really didn't think to, because, again, I've seen some pretty lopsided scores. Like, I've seen some pretty lopsided high school football games in person. Like, I saw 72-0, and that was with the running clock. And it still was 72-0. So I've seen some lopsided scores and been on the sideline of those. So I guess maybe I've been a little bit numb to some of that. But I saw the interesting part is, I guess, for me, is that Johnson Wales never got a shot off. Like they recorded with no shots, not even a shot on goal, much less they didn't get a shot off, which to me is almost the more impressive.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Like it's almost like how do you go a game and not take a shot at all? That's almost unfathomable in lacrosse in general. And I guess it was also the face-off. It was, 53 of 59 or something like that in favor of Colorado Mesa. I mean, obviously in a game like that, the stats are obviously skewed one way or the other. But, I mean, I guess for me, I wasn't overly offended, but I kind of and my initial thought was, well, what is too much in a game like that? Like what is at what point? And I mean, it could have been more because the game got stopped with like 7 minutes and change left in the fourth. Like the game was called, so this legitimately could have been 65, 70. I mean, they could have put up probably another 15 goals.
You know, it just brings up something like, you're out of a game. You can't compete. So why would you subject your own team to it? I think from one thing I heard was the coach for Colorado Mesa asked the other coach, like, do you want to continue playing? And he was like, yes. And then he turned down the running clock.
Running clock, yeah.
There should be no question about that. It should be automatic. It should be automatic at a certain point. It should be taken out of their hands, because what coach wants to capitulate that much and make it look bad? Because coaches are always going to fight. So take it out of the coach's hands for that. So there's that point.
The running clock, in my opinion, I'm like, that solves a lot of this. Because, I mean, you have the shot clock. So you're telling the teams, like, you have to shoot. And to be honest, like, I can't get on board with telling a team, like, just intentionally turn the ball over. Because that's not... You wouldn't do that in any other aspect of life. So don't tell the kid, like, just intentionally turn the ball over. Lay the ball down and let the other team have it. That's not why you play the game. And honestly, if you're keeping score, you're trying to win. There's certain rules in which teams compete by. So telling them to turn it over, to me, is not a legitimate thing, because it's almost like rubbing it into the team, like, you can't take it. So I'm just getting
right. Like we've had this discussion. There's too many ways to interpret it. Now, the high school game, that was Brother Rice, correct?
The most goals scored in a high school game that I have all time is 41 by Brother Rice in 2017.
Okay, so I was just with Coach Chala on Sunday, and we talked about it.
Yeah.
Out of the blue, this was before this thing happened, and he was explaining it to me. I didn't even bring it up, but he was just talking about, because we had the discussion, Brother Rice is so good this year.
Yeah.
That they're going to pummel teams.
Yeah.
I mean, they're going to pummel them. So he was talking about that situation. He's like, when we beat that team, he's like, I had my third stringers in. He said, I had kids who never played in a game got to play. He's like, and what am I going to tell them? Don't shoot.
Yeah.
He's like, there's no good. So what he did to help this situation is he made another team. It was his JV team, but since he was calling it his JV team, the other varsity teams wouldn't play him.
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to play a JV team.
Right.
So he called it a varsity B team. So he's now his varsity B team. So now his varsity B team plays against up and coming teams, new teams that aren't as strong. He has the B team play him.
Right.
Because as I just talked to a coach today about Brother Rice specifically, one of the quotes he said was, they're too good. They're way too good.
Right.
So they could kill anybody. So, and then he also told me that there's an 18-goal slaughter rule in Michigan. So you get to 18 goals, the game's over.
Right.
Now, I don't know if that was his rule. I didn't clarify if that was how he was doing it or if that's a Michigan rule. But I think that's a pretty good rule. Because if you're up 18 goals on a team, odds are
they're not coming back. There's no comeback.
So and you, like we've talked about in baseball, there's teams that knew they were better and they went for that slaughter rule score.
Yeah.
Like, let's get this thing done in 3 innings, or 4 innings, whatever it was.
Well, when I played, at least in North Carolina, it was a 10-run rule, but it had to be in the 5th inning. Like, you got certain amount of, you had a certain amount of, so you got down 10-0 in the first inning. You weren't out of it. They didn't go like, all right, game's over. Like, so, and in Maryland in football, there wasn't a slaughter rule that I'm aware of, at least at that time. But if you got up by, and I forget what it was, it might have been like 25, it was the running clock, but the coaches had no choice. Like, it's not like the referee asked the coach, like, do you want to go for it? It's just like, once that threshold hit, the clock just ran. Didn't stop
and that's
for
fine.
anything.
That's what I agree with, because then you take it out of the coach's hands.
Yeah.
Because you've got to understand, coaches are the most competitive people I've ever met. I mean, at any level, sometimes it's a little unhinged, sometimes it's a little unhealthy for them, but their whole goal, their job is to win. So to tell them to not win or to lay down or to quit, take it out of their hands.
Yeah.
and then you won't have this problem. I mean, I just recall people saying there was an unwritten rule to not put more than 20 on a team. Well, I've just seen that blown away this week by about 25 teams. Like, I'm looking at 26-0, 23-1, and that's the problem I have as someone who's covering Midwest lacrosse in or high school Midwest lacrosse is there are established teams that are very good.
Yes.
And then there are up and coming teams and fledgling teams that aren't. And then when they play each other, you can't blow them out because you might discourage them from playing. So there should be, like what Brother Rice has done. And my son's team for Carmel, he's on the JV team at Carmel. He has just played 2 varsity teams.
Uh-huh.
And they still smoked them.
Yeah.
But still, that's how it should be. I mean, it's got to be an honest thing saying we're going to be in the C League, the B League, or the A League.
Right.
And now if you're in the A League and you decide to put yourself in this A League that I'm imagining in my perfect world, if someone puts 40 on you, that's your fault. You didn't have to step up,
Yeah.
Then all bets are off. If you're going into the upper echelon, there you go. You're asking.
And I mean, we've talked about this topic before, but I mean, it's also you have a double-edged sword. Like, if you want to know where you rank against or where you stand against a Brother Rice or a Culver Academy or a program like that, like at some point you're going to have to step up and play them, and you might get destroyed. Like, you might get you might get 25 or 30 hung on you, but unless you play them, then you're not going to know. And I mean, I guess I still take it, and I guess I'll share the story here again, but like when I was playing baseball, we got down by 10 runs, and we had played one of those, like we had lost our first game and we had to play for the rest of the day to reach the championship game, and we got to the championship game and we got smoked early, and we were just waiting for the fifth inning to just, we were like the team, because we were playing in 98-degree heat for the entire day. We were all exhausted. We were all dehydrated. We were all mentally done and ready to go home. And the coach heard a bunch of us talking, and he's like, we don't lay down. He absolutely refused. He was like, I will not. He did not want. He was very adamant. He was like, what you do now, he's like, you will basically carry with you for the rest of your life. He's like, if you lay down now, this is what you're teaching yourself to do as an adult. And he was like, and as your coach, he's like, I will not allow you to lay down. He's like, if you want to quit, leave now. You are off the team. You can walk out of this dugout. He's like, but if you're in this dugout, you will play. And we played. I mean, it wasn't not a bad news Bears situation. There was no comeback. We got destroyed, and we lost by more than 10 runs. But it was like, we played, and that's always stuck with me. And it was one of those. I'm like, all right, you have a choice to make as the team. And I mean, I don't know enough about the other team. I mean, it sounded like if the coach declined the running clock, he made a conscious choice, and maybe he had reasons for that. Maybe he's like, I haven't seen any interviews with him. I've seen a lot of people talk about what they think is right, but I haven't heard from the actual coaches themselves to say, like, like, I made a conscious choice to not have the running clock because I wanted the boys to, maybe he wanted them to learn a lesson. Maybe it was one of those things like, I mean, a couple weeks ago, and I don't remember if we talked about it or not, when Izzo with Michigan State, everybody was calling for him to be fired and all the crazy stuff because he was yelling at his kid. Like, sometimes that's the way you get people's attention. I'm not even going to say kids. Like, I mean, they're not kids. They're adults. Like, they're college kids. They're men. Sometimes you just they got to be woken up. And if getting 52 hung on them, like, oh, wait, I don't want that to happen again. If that makes them work a little bit harder in practice to get better, because no one wants to be embarrassed. We were embarrassed to be on that team, to sit on the other time, watch the other team just put up runs. It's like, it's embarrassing, but there's two types of people. There's the type of people that are going to brush themselves off and try harder next time, or you're going to lay over or walk out and be like, you know what, I don't have to deal with this. I mean, so it's, as we've discussed before, there's nuance to everything. There is no one solution. I can't get on board with firing someone because the coach hung up 52. They won. I mean, both teams, it sounded like Johnson and Wells, they only had like 18 kids on the team, so they didn't have a lot of people to play. I mean,
and they were playing Division 2. They were Division 3 playing up. Everything about it's like, I'm asking for an ass kicking. I mean,
Yeah.
that's,
I mean,
and they got it.
yeah.
I mean, I think it was a little excessive, but
Yeah.
everything about it is like we moved up. We didn't have enough players. We didn't ask for the running clock. It's like, there are sometimes you might get a little angry about it saying, my kids are out here still playing and they've lost, desire to play.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to make this game over and we're saying, hey, let's start a running clock. And you're saying, no, running clock. Then I might turn around to say to my kids, okay, they don't want a running clock. Let's put 50 on them. That could have been a thing too, because that's not unheard of.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those, like, you if the opposing team turns down a running clock, you're like, all right, well then just play. Like,
right.
Don't just run your sets, practice, like treat it. You treat it like a practice, like just pretend we're running drills and
right.
Run your practice. Because I mean, last thing, it's like, what is it? The way you practice is the way you play. Like, last thing you want to do is start getting sloppy out there and just be like, all right, whatever, and just kind of tossing the ball around just because you can. Then it's like, that's like, all right, you hate to pick up bad habits. And I mean, neither team was above 500. It's not like we're talking like
that's even crazier too, though.
Yeah, the stat. I mean.
5 and 6.
There's anything you can go down, and they said that team, the Colorado Mesa, they lost by 12 and 13 goals this season. So I mean, it's down the line. It is just a nutso stat line. Like, no matter how you kind of slice it and dice it, and I mean, but it's always when, like, I've had people from the high school in talk about. I mean, we had a year where Centennial out of Georgia, they were putting up. I mean, they had offensive firepower out the wazoo, and they were hanging 30 on teams pretty regularly, and people were irritated about it. And I was like, I talked to the coach, and like he was like, yeah, he's getting a lot of crap. He's like, I'm playing my third string. He's like, I'm sitting Nicky on the bench. He's like, He's not playing past the half, and he's like, it's tricky. I mean,
right. It is.
It's one of those things. I mean, you get what when Virginia won the national championship, where you basically play the four corners and just play keep away. No one wants to watch that either.
That's
awful.
That's awful. Bro, I love the shot clock era. I think it's good. This might happen. Don't play up. Don't play a Division II team if you're a Division III team, especially a shorthanded Division III team.
Or if you do, it's like, agree. It's like, all right, coaches agree with before, like, all right, if you get up like 15, and I mean, maybe there does need to be a slaughter rule, but like, all right, if you're up by 15 at halftime, game's over.
There should be a slaughter rule at this point.
You institute a slaughter
rule. I mean, not
rule.
even for college, but at least for high school, which we cover, there has to be a slaughter rule at this point, because it's the sport is exploding. You know it.
And there's going to be more imbalance as teams.
Tons of imbalance.
As states grow, there's going to be those ones that have no experience, and the other teams, like, you're going to get a Brother Rice that's going to play a brand new program at some point in Michigan, and
there's got to be a slaughter.
Like, what do you do? It's like, all right,
it protects the both teams.
Yes, because you don't want anybody, because even though the coaches might, because coaches, they're adults, they're grown men, their brains are fully formed. Like, you get the kids, kid gets embarrassed and feels like he's being embarrassed. Like, they might take some cheap shots. Yeah, the mouths start running and heat, tempers flare. I mean, you take all that out of the equation. You're just like, all right, slaughter rule 15. I'm just picking 15 goals, like 15 goals at halftime, whatever it is. Like, but it's an agreed upon running clock at this point, and then it's like, all right, then it's done. Like,
I've seen it this year. I've seen teams that I've seen run up the score, and I literally made a gesture to the coach across the field. I put my hands up like, why are your starters still? And I walked out of the field because I'm like, I don't ever want to think at one point, oh, I want to, get on lax records, even though it's not a big deal, but it might be, and I know how people sometimes give you grief for saying, it's because you're putting these records out that people want to beat them.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's any reason to have someone wants to argue about something anytime, you can always find it.
Yeah, you can find a reason to say, like,
right. I just walked. I walked out. I'm like, I don't mind, or assist. What I didn't like was there was no assists on these goals. You're killing a team, and you're not even passing it. You're just burying it. So those are the things. And I think when you have a slaughter rule, I think that'll help the growth of the sport.
Yeah,
especially in less powerhouse states and new states, because then teams won't get embarrassed, and it won't make them say, why do I want to play this game? I want to quit. And my whole philosophy and my whole goal and everything I'm trying to accomplish is to grow the game, especially here in the Midwest, and beating somebody by 25 and 30 isn't going to help grow it. So let's take that out of the equation and say here's an arbitrary number. If you hit this, maybe not at halftime, maybe if you're down by 20 at half, then it ends.
Yeah.
But after half, if you're down 15, then it's over. Give them a chance.
And you want
it's bad for the other team too. They might not get their kids to play. But
yeah, I mean, you could look at it the other way. It's like maybe that's the only time that third string kid ever gets to play is in a game like that. Not that that's a reason to let it continue, but it's like I look at it from the flip side. Like, there's a kid that might not get to play in any other time, and that may be his opportunity. And he's like, that's his goal. Like, he's like, I scored a varsity goal, and and it was a blowout, but he scored a goal, and he will be happy about that. But yeah, I'm never gonna make anybody happy with it anyway. So I, to be honest, don't care. I'm like, nobody. I have yet to talk to any team. Like, I don't think I've talked to any of the coaches that are on this that have ever told me, like, yeah, we wanted to make the list, so that's why we did it. Like, nobody out there is doing that. Like, that's to me, that's a ridiculous thought. Like,
I know, but parents and people who say that, you're like, seriously? I mean,
yeah,
come on.
There's not a coach on the sideline of any high school game that's like, we want to have the most goals scored in the game on Lax records, so we're gonna run it up on you guys.
Right.
Because to be honest, the teams that could do it, you mean that Culver Academy could have put up 50 a couple times this year, and they are nowhere on this list. So, I mean, if there's someone that wanted to do it, like, there's teams that could do it. Like, these teams, it's just matter of circumstance and whatever happened. I mean, I have no context for most of these games. Like, there's a few I know what happened, but other games, like, it's how it played out. And like I said, there's a lot of, you can tell by the lopsided scores, like 30-0. Like, obviously there was two lopsided divisions and they played each other, and you don't know the circumstances as to why, and it's not going to be the last time it happened. But I am not that egotistical to think anybody is like intentionally doing it because they want to get their score on this list. If anything, I've had coaches tell me, like, we don't want to make it, so they stop at 24. It's like we don't want to be associated with that kind of stuff. So it's like, if anything, anybody tries to avoid being associated with this kind of thing.
I found it funny. So when I was talking to Coach Chala, he said in that game, he's like, this was a team that was brand new. They didn't know how to. He's like, at the end of the game, our players were positioning their players on D. Like, no, you want to be here when we have, like, it became like a teaching lesson.
Yeah.
Like, he's like, we were showing, and I've seen that before in a youth game. Yeah. I've seen the coach of the team that was killing the other team stop and coach the other team.
Yeah.
And say, here's where you want to be. Here's where you want to be. And that's why I love, because I've only seen that in lacrosse.
Yeah.
Where this coach walked over and said to the other coach of the other team, and it was like a dad coach, and he said, let me position your kids. Yeah. Let me show you what they're being. And then he had his team run the same play and said, now slide here. And I was sort of moved by that. Like, this is a good thing. So
yeah, that's fantastic.
And then hearing about the Brother Rice guys doing the same thing, I'm like, that's the sort of thing that I love about growing the game. That's the stuff that'll help grow the game, as opposed to just the stepping on the throat and beating it. But I think once you're in college, you're a college lacrosse player, well, bets are off.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked with the Miami Notre Dame rivalry and the Miami Florida State and stuff like that. Like, there's no doubt those teams that, like, if they could hang 52, do a 52-0, like there'd be no compunction about it. Like, I mean, you see it all the time with the Division I schools. Like, when Alabama takes on a Division II program, like, it's a 73-0 game. And I mean,
well, because the spread's 65, so you got to beat the spread.
Yeah. Luckily, we don't have that in high school. So
right. They have it in high school football in some places. I can tell you that.
I don't know what some people are doing in the tailgating area before games.
Right.
Maybe someone's, there's some side bets, but at least Vegas isn't worrying about it at that point.
Right.
The other thing, and it's actually kind of fitting, because one of the things that I guess, and we hadn't really talked about it, is basically this is the first season since I have covered lacrosse that LaxPower has not been in existence. And the best segue I could find that used to be the place, like, I would go through every day, and I would just scroll through the scoreboard to get overtimes and scores and see any teams that had the most goals scored or the most overtimes. And it was my first stop every day. And I'll be perfectly honest, like, we were talking before we started recording. It's like I shed a small tear every day when that is not my first stop, because I have a to-do list that's got 6 or 7 different places that I go to try and find scores and information for the high school season. And a lot of them, like, and I'm not even counting the local newspapers that I go to try to find, just basically the stats and stuff like that. Like, I'm just talking like scores. And I actually had someone message me today because I had put that St. Margaret's Episcopal out of California. I think I had said that they had a 12-1, 9-1 record. I can't remember now. It's kind of unimportant what the actual record is. But they were like, oh, they actually have 2 losses and they're like 11-2 or something like that. And I looked at a couple different sites, and no one site is the same. And it's nuts to me. And I did a survey, and I'm going to pull it up here real quick. I did a survey of coaches before the season started. Or actually, I guess we were a couple weeks into the season. Well, depending on where you are, it was before the season started, because there's no perfect time. And it was 44% of the respondents that said they were using Max Preps. At that point, 17 were using Inside Lacrosse. And there was even there's some combinations of those two. So there was even some people were like, oh, we're using this and this. I can tell who the Philly guys are because they said they were using Philly Lacrosse. That's always their favorite response. NJ.com, which is the Newark Star Ledger, which does a phenomenal job of covering lacrosse in New Jersey. Utah Lax, Montgomery County Boys, which is out of Maryland, site I'm familiar with. So it's really ran the gamut of coaches. And I mean, even since then, the NILCA, the National, I always forget what that acronym stands for, the Lacrosse Coaches Association, lax numbers. Like, there's been even other sites that have kind of cropped up to try and fill that void. And I guess for me, I haven't found that any of them have really done the job that LaxPower did. I mean, I know Lax Numbers has got Larry, who founded LaxPower, kind of running it again, but I guess I haven't really, that hasn't yet to become my stop because I haven't seen enough. And I mean, Inside Lacrosse doesn't have it either. Like, I haven't found anyone, and even in the states that I look at, Florida, Tennessee, what are some of the other states? North Carolina, the states that their state association requires them to use Max Preps. When I go in the morning, not all the scores are in there. So
Never.
like, there's never any one place.
Never.
But I know how Max Preps usually works because they are only required, at least in North Carolina and I believe in Florida, they're only required to have it in by the time the playoff seedings will come. Like, they use it for their playoff seedings. So as long as the stuff's in there before that deadline, it counts. So usually what ends up happening, especially in Florida, is about a week before the playoffs, all of a sudden, a year's worth of stats and scores go into the system, whereas they weren't there before. So I don't know how you feel, because obviously this is your first season covering lacrosse in this manner for Lax Records. So I don't know how you feel about the absence of LaxPower, if you're feeling it, if it's quite in the same way that I am.
Well, I don't shed a tear about it, but you've been doing what you're doing for long. I looked at it as a fan before. Yeah. Well, now that I need to look at it, now I realize how important it was. Like, you don't know what you got until it's gone. Yeah. And now I do. And now I'm going, oh, I wish I had this. So now I started out the year doing a combo. Max Preps, the state association sites, like Michigan has, for Michigan, they have an app. Mm-hmm. So I can just click on their app. I put in the team. I get it. It's pretty solid. Yeah. Because I always double check whatever I see on Max Preps. Okay. I look on Max Preps and then I'm like, okay, I have to double check. Yeah. And which I find counterproductive. Inside Lacrosse, it's hard to navigate, especially, I'm sitting on a phone. I might be sitting in 30-degree weather. My hands aren't working. So that's hard. So I've been using Lax Numbers recently just because I could just click on each state. Yeah. And then I can click on the teams. And what they do is they have the teams on their sites sort of by their ranking. Yeah. So odds are, if I'm looking at Illinois, Indiana, Michigan, or Ohio right now, the top 10 teams are pretty much the top 10 teams. So I could go click real quick and see what's going on. Yeah. To get deeper, I mean, they go down all the way. So if I need to see a team that's, maybe the 24th ranked team by their ranking. I would never rank a team 24th. That's a crazy stat. Like, we're ranked 24th. That's not a ranking.
Yeah.
But that shows me. So I've been using Lax numbers more. I would love it if you could sign up for it. I was just telling this to my wife I said, I would pay, I don't know what $5 a month or whatever, $1 a month. I don't know anything to get them money, whatever.
Right.
If I could have 10 teams or 20 teams that I could just put in and then just click and get them all.
Right.
Because I'm not looking at one state. I'm trying to get scores from Minnesota.
Right.
Nebraska. And South Dakota.
Yeah. And we're unique in that. Like, we're probably more the outlier for because obviously there's only so many lacrosse reporters. So if they were trying to if any of these sites were really trying to make their nut off lacrosse reporters, like, none of them would succeed because there's just not enough
like
of us.
LaxPower.
Yeah, they would do just not enough of us. But and I mean, for me, like, it's my day to day is finding the scores, and I figured out ways. But like, I guess today was one of those days where it got hammered home a little bit. And, I may have shed more than one tear because I keep the longest running the winning streaks. So I keep track of those, and LaxPower going away makes it much more difficult to find out, like, all right, when did this streak start? What was the team? Like, kind of get all that detail. Because it used to be, like, you would go to Chaminade out in New York, and you could just click down the year. I mean, they had, I think up back to 2005, you could see their win-loss record and their game-to-game. Like, that doesn't exist because none of these entities have that sort of history. I mean, I was even checking today because I was out of curiosity because I was looking, like, Garden City. They've now won 17 in a row, and they're 7-0 now. And I'm like, all right, were they in last year? And I went back and I was able to see and count what they were. But then I did that for some other teams, and there was like games. You could tell the schedules weren't complete because there's 5 games on their schedule on Inside Lacrosse in the 2018 season. I'm like, all right, I know this team played more than 5 games, and there may have been 2 results, and like not even all those had results on them. So, I guess and we'll probably ask this at the end, but like, I'm sure people listening to this have opinions on this. I would love to know what everybody else is using, like, because I have yet to see any one entity that really seems to, and I was talking to several people, and this is playing out almost exactly how I thought it was going to. It is going to be the Wild West for a few years until someone stands on the shoulder of a giant and figures it out, but it is hard because it requires so much buy-in. Like, you can fail 50% of the time in this, and you will succeed because you really only need half the coaches in the nation to buy in, which is still a lot. But if you get 50% of them, those other scores eventually fill in. Like, you don't need St. Anthony's and Chaminade. You don't need both coaches to go in and fill in the win-loss of that game. You just need one of them to do it. So for every game, like, and I did this whenever I used to run the scoreboard at a Maryland high school football site where I ran mdvarsity.com, and we never heard from every coach, but we heard from half the coaches in the state, and that was all we needed, because then you could fill in the nightly scoreboard for that. But I'm not seeing anybody. I mean, you can scroll through Inside Lacrosse team, like, they have a lot, but they don't have everybody. So I guess it's going to be curious to see. And then the history aspect is a whole nother ball of wax because everybody's starting, but no one has the year by year that goes. So
they're all like, looking to you now.
Yeah, and I mean, I never kept year by year, and because to be honest, like, LaxPower existed and they were doing it, and it's like they had a system built, and when LaxPower was around, it was the barrier to entry was so high because I'm like, well, they got almost 2 decades worth of momentum built up, and those guys are doing it, and everybody's already doing it. I mean, no one was doing it. I mean, Max Preps was kind of trying, but they were really like, and I mean, it was really only a few states that were using it. Like, more states are doing it now. I mean, I saw New Jersey, they're basically they're coming up with, rolling their own solution to figure out their playoff seedings now. Like, they're not using Max Preps like some other states have decided to do. So, I'd love to know what everybody else is using because I know Lax numbers, like, they started strong, and I haven't really checked. Like, I checked their Twitter following, not that that's really an indication of traffic. Like, they're right around 2,000 now, and I mean, they're a few months old, which is obviously a good traction. But how many people are really using it? Because I was told by one coach in one state that their entire their state rep said they were going to use the NILCA site. and nothing else. So I'm like, all right, well, like, all right, that's one state. And I'm like, well, they're saying everybody's going to use it, but you never get 100%. You're never getting every coach. Again, you only need half of them. So I guarantee it's not every coach, because one coach is probably like, oh, I know this coach will do it, so I don't have to worry about it. So it's going to be one of those things. Like, I think I don't know if everybody's feeling it quite the way I am, or maybe the way you are, but I know people feel the loss of LaxPower. I'm just kind of curious, like, where's everybody finding that warm fuzzy spot for this season, or is it just not, that void just not getting filled? Because I haven't found it yet. Like, it's one of those, like, every morning it's like, oh, I got to do this. Got to run through this gauntlet of just to find out, the scores and the winning streaks and stuff like that.
And see, I do it for a different reason. I do it to see who I'm going. Like, I try to plan my week. And so you jump into 20 different sites is difficult. So that's why I've sort of narrowed it down to Lax numbers right now and said, okay. And I still forgot. Like, I talked to a coach this morning. I said, okay, I'll be at your game tonight. He's like, my game's Saturday. I'm like, okay, I forgot. I'm like, I got home at 1:30 in the morning last night.
Yeah.
I said, I thought your game was here. I flip-flopped them. I'm like, okay, so I'll be in Louisville on Saturday. And then I was supposed to be in Forest Hills tonight. And then I couldn't get out there.
Yeah.
So that's what I used to like. And again, I've said this before, I'm an analog guy in a digital world. Like, I write it down. I mean, I'm standing, this is like all my notes that I mean, there's no compute, which I should, and just put it on my phone, but I just don't trust it. But now I'm losing my notes.
Yeah.
So I schedule it out and I'm like, okay, this is good. This is good. And then I see the scores. And when I go on it, then I see, oh, look at the 10 scores that I didn't look at from Ohio last night. Oh, this is great. And then I'll reach out to some people in Ohio and say, how was that game? And, because I like to talk to the coaches and talk to parents and everyone. So how I do it is different from you, because I'm more like just going there and hanging out with the people and watching games and having fun with it. So that's why I use it. Yours is a much tougher job to do, because this is the records.
Yeah.
And like, I tell everyone when they're sitting there saying, oh, how's Lax? I said, I don't think you could understand how much work it would take to do this. I think I said it last night. I think Illinois has 74 teams.
Yeah.
I think 74 teams. I said, so you have 74 teams, and that's from the top of the state to the bottom of the state.
Yeah.
And then you got to find those records for those teams. That's just one state. Now times it by 50. And I'm like, and think about that. I go, this is one guy. I go, he doesn't have a team. It's just him. So, and then that's when people are like, oh, wow, that's really, cool. I'm like, well, then follow him, or, go to his site, help the guy out.
Yeah.
I'm not afraid to push people and say, hey, this guy's trying to, make a living doing some things and helping us out for fans.
Yeah.
It's important. So that's why it's more important for you than for me.
Yeah, and I mean, there's that aspect, but I even look at it. I mean, not that LaxPower ever had times, but I remember when I went to the Cathedral, St. Ignatius, Upper Arlington, like that series of MICDS games, like I remember, because I was like, all right, what time do I need to be there on Sunday? And I think one of the teams had the game starting at 6, another team had the game starting at like 2. And so it was like, and then I think Max Preps had it starting like either at 6. At one of the other times, I'm like, I have no idea what time this game actually starts. It's like 2 sites have 2 different start times, and so like I just ended up emailing the coaches like, "What time's your game start on Sunday?"
Right.
And then it ended up getting changed. It was supposed
I was
to.
Gonna say,
it was 11. It was 11,
yeah.
And then it got changed to 1. But luckily, that was due to weather. That had nothing to do with scheduling.
Right.
But I've run into that a few times. So I'm like, it's gotten to the point where I'm like, I can't trust any of these.
Right.
Like,
I go right to the coaches and say, "What time is your game?" And I'm like, and I tell them, I say, I'm sorry to bother you, but what time's your game? And they're like, oh, it's at 7. I'm like, good, because it's a 4-hour drive for me. So I need to, I can't be off by 2 hours because then I'm driving 4 hours and being like, wait, the game's over?
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm like, give me the farthest I've gone is like 4.5 hours now. So I'm like, at least give me a little heads up. I mean, that's going to change. I'm heading to New York in 2 weeks. So that'll be a little farther drive, but I'm going to be a day ahead of that one. So, but that's where I'm the time. That's the tough one, especially for me, is I can't trust anyone yet. So I just go right to the source.
Yeah.
Or, Twitter is a good thing, because I go to I'll go on to whatever team's Twitter site is, and I'll say, hey, what time is the game tonight?
Yeah.
And then I find out. But that's the only way that works
Yeah.
because I don't trust the other ones. And there's a reason. I mean, it's not like, oh, I just don't trust. I don't trust them because this is what I'm doing, and I'm on the road and I'm away from my family. I want to make it worth it.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be very unhappy if I got to somewhere and they're like, "Oh, the game's over." It'd be a very different,
Be a cranky drive back.
Yes, it would. It would not be good. So that's the important part for me, and I haven't found that trust yet.
Yeah.
Like you said.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Like, I think Inside Lacrosse has gotten more traction this year than they did last year, but it's always one of those, like, how, are they in it for the long haul? And the only time will tell that. I mean, because I remember talking to, we've had Damian Hall from Triangle Lax on here before. As like, it's gonna be one is like, I think it's always one of those, like, people have lost the momentum of posting to LaxPower. Like, that became so ingrained in everybody's day to day and what they did, and that momentum has been broken. So it's all something new. And then you got state associates saying, like, well, you have to do it here. So then, like, well, if I have to do it here, I'm not going to do it.
I'm
not entering this stuff 3 different places. So it kind of reminds me almost of the streaming services nowadays. Like, there's going to be winners and losers, and it's just, who's got the most stamina. It's going to take buy-in. Like, whoever gets the most, literally whoever gets the most will win. Like, you just got to get whoever gets the 50% more, and like whoever buys it in. I mean, because they're all kind of doing pretty much the same thing. I mean, Max Preps has the stats aspect to it, but Inside Lacrosse, Lax Numbers, they're scores, and they each have their ranking, their power ranking. So I guess it depends on what you're looking for. Like, people like the power ranking; they like to see that. I'm not as concerned about that as
I don't buy it as much. You know that. There's numbers people, and I'm an eye person. I'm watching it, and I can say that's not the second best team in the state. They might have the best record in their numbers, but I always question it.
Yeah,
just look at Max Preps now. I mean, look who their number 1 team in the country is. I think it might be.
Can't even say.
I think it might be Lambert.
Yeah,
who's a great team. I don't know if they're the number 1 team in the country. I'm going to go out on a limb and say they're not.
No,
and then Arapahoe from Denver is like number 2, and I'm like, and then I get calls like, "Hey, we're ranked number 13th in the country by Max Preps." I'm like, "Is that the hat you're gonna hang your hat on that one?" I'm like, it's not true. I go, "Sure, it always sounds great when it's your team, but when Chaminade was ranked like 53rd, I'm like, I can't buy into that.
Yeah,
it just."
But that's a perfect example, because Chaminade beat St. Anthony's last night 14-5. I might have that score wrong, but when I was looking up stuff and I was looking at Lax Numbers. Lax Numbers has St. Anthony's ahead of Chaminade in their ranking in New York. And I'm like, all right, that I can't take that seriously, because Chaminade just proved that they are the better team. And the record was updated because the St. Anthony's was 5-1 and Chaminade was undefeated. And I'm like, well, how much stock can I put into that? Because the on the field result tells me a completely different story.
Right.
But then again, I don't worry about the power ranking, so it's not really, for me, that's not a make or break. Like, I'm obviously worried about other things. So it's unfortunately, this probably won't be the last time we have this conversation, because it's not like it is not going to get resolved this year. Like, we'll see how much Lax Numbers grows and gets invested, and what kind of improvements they do, because in my opinion they do need some improvements to the system but then again, Inside Lacrosse does too, and I'm sure everybody knows it. I mean, and it's going to be interesting to see. But again, we would love to hear your guys' feedback, because I know there's coaches that listen to this, I know there's fans that listen to this. Like, what is your favorite aspect of, or what do you look at most? Is it the records? Is it the power ranking? What do you guys look for in one of these scoring systems? And two, if you're a coach, like, what are you using? Like, I had coaches in the survey say they were just using their school website. That was the only place they were posting it. So, I mean, you think about that, like, unless you know to go to that school's website, their scores won't exist anywhere else. That'll be the only official record, is where they post it. And I don't know how you've experienced it, but some of the schools, like, they post their schedule, and then a lot of times, like, it says schedule and results.
Yeah.
But it's usually just schedule. Like, the results never actually get input.
Or sometimes they don't let you get into it. Like, you have to sign in.
Yes. I've run into
sign
that.
in, and I'm like, wait. I'm like, okay, like, just trying to find rosters, you need to sign in to get this.
Yes.
I'm like, oh, come on.
Yeah.
Like, it's not easy to go and get the roster sometimes. I mean, some teams have been very great. I mean, literally beforehand, here's our roster, here's our players, here's their numbers, and then other I get it's nothing. So I'm there like scrambling, like bumping a parent, like who's that? What number's that? I mean, it's been sort of good and bad because I didn't know. I've seen teams that have great players, and I was there to look at the great players.
Yeah.
Number. So then I'm going, oh, that kid's great. That kid's great. I'm watching it. And I'm like, that must be so-and-so. And they're like, no, that's not him. And I'm like, really? Well, who is that kid? Because that guy is pretty darn good.
Yeah.
And turns out I like to always pat myself on the back. I go, yeah, it turns out when I point that kid out, they're like, oh, yeah, he's going here, or he's got a scholarship to the, or going D1. I'm like, okay,
right.
No one's ever mentioned him outside probably their school, but he stands out on paper, or he stands out on the field. That's what I like to look at. So just, I'm positive I make things come happy out of both sides.
Yeah. Well, welcome to high school lacrosse. Welcome to high school sports in general. I've been to many a game where rosters not exist. You take a picture of the scorebook and you try to decipher handwriting, and you hope. That's the worst, is when you're trying to, because I hate it when usually mom emails me to be like, you spelled my kid's name wrong. That's rule number one when you learn about reporting, is don't spell the kid's name wrong. That'll be the quickest way to get an email. That's a whole nother podcast.
I was just gonna say, please don't let's not go there, because I could just print stuff out of what the emails I get and messages I get over the most inane crazy stuff. Not to mention, I don't know if you've seen my Twitter post where I keep posting my parent article.
Yes.
Because I go to these games, I'm like, and I keep thinking, a documentary filmmaker, I'm giving someone an idea, should just go for a whole year across the country and film the crowd. And then just say, this is what it looks like. This is what you look like. Because, funny, I mean, I had my son with me this weekend at the Brother Rice New Trier game. And he turns to me the second quarter. He's like, is it like this at every game? And I'm like, yeah, it is. It is. And he's like, do they know we can't hear him on the field? He plays lacrosse. So he's like, I don't hear any of this. He's like, I never hear it. And I said, that's why I go, I don't say a word, And then the pick up the ball. I always want to turn to the person and be like, do you think they don't know to pick up the ball? I said,
no, that's how you play this game.
Right. We can't get on this thing, or I'll be stuck in
that's what I'm going to stop you right there, because I think that is a perfect tease for an upcoming podcast, because we've danced around this issue off recording several times, and I think there's going to be a perfect time to talk about it. And I'm just kind of waiting for the right moment, because I'm just waiting for that viral video that is on the cusp of happening, because it's not a matter of if, it's just a matter of when. It's happened before it'll happen again. So we're definitely going to be talking about that at some point. So consider that a tease and a small preview, because if you got that much information now, just imagine what's going to happen in a few weeks when you have a little bit more ammo. And I'm going to a game this weekend, and then I'm going to New York for the Geico thing in a few weeks, which that'll be interesting, because I love the Long Island fans, and I've been to games, and I've heard the stuff they said, and it makes me laugh every single time, because I'm like, I can't believe I'm in a high school lacrosse game.
Right.
So we'll both have some fun stories to share as the season goes on. But for now, let everybody know where they can find you online.
On Twitter, I'm at MFWCHI, and my email is mward@laxrecords.com. And as people who've contacted me, it's a conversation. I'm not going to not answer, and I talk about anything lacrosse. So hit me up.
And you can find me at Lax Records on all the social networks, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. It's always at Lax Records. And we are now, I think this might be the first podcast we've done when I can officially say we are at youtube.com/Lax Records, because we did hit 100 subscribers earlier, late, not last week, but the week before. So we actually have the official fancy URL where it's just nice, clean. It's not a series of digits. So you can visit us there. Makes it easier. Yeah, it makes it a lot easier. So you can visit us there as well. So everybody, have a week.
See ya.